Hello once more. It's great to be with you for the final panel discussion of SCOMathon, and this is a good one. I've been looking forward to this one all day because of the scope, essentially, for how much we could talk about.
I also was looking forward to that, Bruce. Cool.
Well, it's good it's not just me. The topic for this panel is Microsoft monitoring. What do we want to see? Now, before we get into anything else, I'll give you a little bit of background as to how this kind of came to be. Nathan Gow and I were having a little chat about what exactly we'd like for his SCOMathon session to be this year. And we ended up on a free exchange of ideas on what Microsoft should do or could do. And we came to the conclusion that this would make for a really good discussion to have in front of other people and with a larger audience. So that was the general gist, which is always a good sort of starting point because it means for it's an organic topic that has come from one of our regular speakers. So I guess before we dig in, let's introduce everyone. So I'm Bruce Cullen. You're probably sick of hearing from me because I've been around all day. I'm Director of Engineering at Squared Up. We have with us Nathan Gow. You are, well, I'll let you introduce yourself. You're here.
Sure. I'm a security technical specialist. Obviously, I work for Microsoft, and I do have to caveat that anything I say in this is my opinion only. Does not reflect the views or direction of my company or anything like that. I'm just kind of telling you what I think. And I'm legitimately curious what you're wearing, Cameron. Anyway, but yeah, go.
System Center Universe, man.
It's good to have you with us, Nathan. Cameron, you might as well go next. System Center Universe tells a bit about your history with SCOM, but only a small fraction. So let's I'll give the floor to you.
Yeah, appreciate it. So Cameron Fuller, I'm a solution director of Quisitive. Same general caveats that Nathan gave with regards to employer and perspectives. The T-shirt I'm wearing is a shout out to a conference that we used to run back in the day called System Center Universe that a lot of the crew here may know. Just felt like going retro today, so that's what I'm wearing. So I'm glad to be involved in this conversation.
It's a good T-shirt. You wear it well. Thank you very much for being here. I've gone for a less exciting T-shirt. I'm Squared Up brand underneath here. Next up, we'll bring in Harold. Harold, good to have you with us.
Good to be on board. I don't think, Cameron, I don't think I have one of those T-shirts, though. I thought I remember being involved in that way back when. But so, yeah, Harold Dyke, founder of Silex Software. And my views are, well, they're the views of myself and probably the views of my coworkers here at Silex. So no caveats for me.
That's all good. And finally, Christian.
Well, I got one of those T-shirts. It's still in my cupboard, you know. I know I picked it up, so I do have a stack of them. So yeah, well, Christian Heidkamp, I'm basically do product management, bringing products to markets like for the whole System Center portfolio, not System Center Operations Manager only, but under another title with Actions I do for Service Manager actually. So we have a large ton of Service Manager customers. So we didn't talk much about that, and also config manager, so which is in there, an orchestrator. Yes, so we can't even go in that direction, but and there are still large deployments out there with those. But well, I'm not going to go further that route. So that was my introduction.
All good. You can clearly see that from the scope and breadth of the experience of the panel, we could go in lots of different directions today. So without further ado, let's kick it off with a little bit of scene setting. So when we're talking about Microsoft monitoring, what do we mean? Why are we not just talking about SCOM? What tools are there in the Microsoft space that do monitoring, and what are they good for or bad for, overlap, etc.? Who wants to kick us off with that one? Silence.
I think we all know the answer. I was waiting for somebody else to say something. I mean, you've got SCOM obviously on-prem, and then you've got Azure Monitor in the cloud, right? So I guess it really depends on what you want to do. And obviously, Azure Monitor can do on-prem as well. So, but they're two totally different tools, right? So, and two totally different experiences. And I think that's probably the hard part of melding the two, right? So I'll let somebody else kind of go from there and kind of see where this goes. But
well, as I said in my session, it's been a journey through all kind of different solutions. So we've been on intelligence packs at one point. We had OMS. We had all kinds of different solutions in the past. So the cloud part for me, in some extent, seemed to be kind of an experiment in some areas, to be honest. So, and I did like the Aquila from the beginning, the private preview, now the public preview, and I was just in my session talking about the problems you might run into. So it's still it's medium raw, I'd say, at this point. So the Azure Monitor, for example, has made better experience, but also there with the change of the query language a few years back to Cousteau also was I learned the previous language and then it's changed all over again. So it's like, well, thank you. Wasn't really helpful though. So, but in the end, the management packs are with it. It's well, some hate the XML format, but once you wrap your brain around it, I think it can still do a lot of things with embedded scripts. So we had heard today about the PowerShells you can embed, and it's really powerful in the end. But well, it's still a bit clunky in some areas. So, but for me, still the first choice.
Nothing like a new query language or scripting language to learn. Is there such good fun? All right, so that's a good bit of scene setting. So we've got SCOM and we've got Azure Monitor. One's in the cloud, one's on-prem. There's clearly some overlap. Some things that each are good at. I would guess that the cloud one, Azure Monitor, is good for cloud and SCOM is good for on-prem. That's a bit of logic there. But there are other tools that are in the Microsoft sort of ecosystem, not from vendors even, from Microsoft, that are adjacent to those two tools. Certainly thinking, of a couple off the top of my head, but I'd like to hear what my panel's view is on this point. What tools are you aware of that are similar?
If I haven't gone yet, I'll go ahead and grab that first. So Sentinel, Azure Sentinel is the first one that I would bring to bear. So Sentinel, from my perspective, is kind of the next gen security idea, in essence. So it's taken what we used to have in SCOM, because we had availability, performance, configuration, and security, and kind of taken that stack and really revolutionized it, make it into a cloud-based solution to data aggregate and so SIEM and SOAR across, pretty much anything. So I would put that as a good cloud or a good adjacent to Azure Monitor and SCOM type solutions. And of course, from earlier today, we also talked briefly about SCOM MI, which I have to call, I'm going to start calling SCOMI because it really looks like SCOMI. But SCOM Managed Instance, I'd say, is probably also another piece of this equation.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Any other tools anyone else wants to chuck into the mix?
Well, there's one. If you open your browser and put status.office.com, you'll get like a good overview of like we are using in many cases Microsoft 365 products, right? We do so, and that is the monitoring which Microsoft provides us, status.office.com, and it is, though, I have to say, that what Microsoft wants us to know about the status, not eventually the actual status, but still something you can look at.
It's definitely true that
it's out of this call. I'm just checking.
You did say your view through your own, right? Yes, it's every company has their own status page essentially, and you're right that they tell you what they want you to know. If they can resolve something quicker than you can see it, they're not necessarily going to tell you. I think that's unique to Microsoft, but very true. Any other tools that people want to chuck into the mix before we move on?
I guess I would also throw in possibly Azure Policy into that, and it's perhaps not monitoring per se, but doing some configuration assessments, and it's a good. I think it's a good tool. We've seen some of our customers are sort of medium-sized businesses, a good tools to help them assess their current state from a relatively high level, I think, but their current state of their IT infrastructure, particularly in some areas of compliance.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. And in a similar vein, it's adjacent to rather than true monitoring, but I would chuck Intune into the mix essentially myself. It's obviously meant more for MDM and MAM, but there is some clear overlap because with having an agent that's on endpoints comes monitoring essentially, so you can't really avoid it. I think, unless there's anyone else has a burning desire to throw another tool in the pot, it's clear to me that there are enough of them out there already. So it's really hard for people to figure out which tool to kind of use when. And the most obvious one that we touched on right at the beginning is Azure Monitor and SCOM, let alone SCOM MI. So why can't we simply just chuck SCOM out and use Azure Monitor?
I'll jump on this one because this has kind of been what I kind of would like to see or would hope to see is people don't know what they don't know, and that's kind of, I think, what to me was the big selling point in SCOM, right? Is you had a management pack or a solution. So if I don't know SQL, right, drop a management pack in and I have basic SQL monitoring, and now I can work with a SQL engineer to tune something, right? Same with Active Directory, same with anything. Even with SaaS-based solutions, yes, I don't own nearly as much of the responsibility for managing a SaaS-based solution, but I still have to. I still have governance components, right? I still have some of these things I have to do with a SaaS-based solution. And I'm not talking the security components when we talk about things like Sentinel, right? I mean, that's a different conversation, right? But I still don't know what I don't know. But even though the scope of what I have to know may have been reduced significantly, I still have to know it. And so I think that's where you still see a lot of like, I'm stuck with SCOM and I'm stuck in the ways and I still want to keep it, is because one, I have an on-prem infrastructure that's not going away because hybrid's here to stay. And two, if I've got a mature, developed SCOM environment, I've actually got a pretty good monitoring process wrapped around it. And so I'm really in that when I'm going to the cloud and I've got, well, I don't know what I don't know. I don't have that capability, I guess, for lack of a better term. I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but I think that's why you don't see SCOM just chucked away. And if I were to say what I'd like to see is how do we either get that into Azure Monitor, or how do you merge the two in some capacity so you can get it, right? That's my pie in the sky. This is my dream. That's what I want.
I think, and to that point, Nathan, I think possibly the number one thing that we hear about from our customers when they're spinning up services in Azure is that they're looking for that curated monitoring experience that is delivered. SCOM does a great job in delivering that through management packs. And I think it's exactly what you say. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, and you're responsible for perhaps fewer things that are running in Azure in some ways, but they're still looking for that curated experience, and that's something that is not readily available as of today anyway.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on that for a second. So I'm going to use this from an analogy perspective, and especially targeted to the audience that we've got today. So SCOM is like somebody hands you a completely Lego built TIE fighter, okay? You might need to do a few little tweaks to it, but generally speaking, it does what it needs to do, okay? Azure Monitor is, they throw you a bunch of Legos with no instruction kits and say, build a TIE fighter.
Okay, interesting. That's a great analogy, actually. So if it were made easier to use, do you think that would be the answer then? Is that what it comes down to?
I think it would help, but I think there's also a second major point, which was already alluded to or pointed out directly, I think, through Harold and Nathan, is we don't have the same baseline understanding of the services, the resources that exist in Azure to know, are they healthy? Are they functional? How is a app resource plan going to be identified or is healthy or unhealthy? VMs and stuff like that, it's relatively straightforward, but now you've got all these new resources and there's no predefined monitoring that tells you this is a problem for this thing, even just in a general baseline perspective. That's a huge miss right now.
I hear you. So SCOM has that, and it's delivered in the form of management packs. So add management packs to Azure Monitor and we're golden, right?
Well, from a technology perspective, that's hard, right? KQL, HTML or XML, sorry, totally different languages, right? So, I mean, I'm sure they could come up with a way to do it, but that's not just going to be a next done kind of thing, right? So, but yeah, ideally, yes, that would be a goal.
What I'm a bit worried about is the technology, as you said, Nathan. So we have the MMA, and if you look into it, it's like Stone Age, basically. They have the cache, the ESE database in there, which is sometimes going crazy and gives headaches. So, and the .NET requirements are there are really old. Actually, it should be deprecated already, or is deprecated. I don't know where it's based on. So
MMA is being deprecated. Well, sorry, on the Azure side. But yeah.
Yeah, that's the point, right? So
Right.
it's the centerpiece of every management server at this point, like processing all the workloads. So that's a question to be asked, and I'm not sure if anyone that has asked the question.
Interesting. So it's not just about bringing management packs to SCOM, because fundamentally it's easier said than done. So what does that mean for SCOM MI then? How does that fit into this picture?
I think they're heading a good direction with SCOM MI, and I'll go first really quick, but I think they're heading a good direction if they integrate it as a easy to use service to fulfill a particular function. The customer shouldn't need to know how monitoring is done. They should be able to literally go to a chatbot and go, I need monitoring for a SQL server, bam, and get configured, get a requested a configuration for what they're looking for. They shouldn't have to spend a whole lot of time spinning up tooling, figuring out how things work and the rest of it to achieve what should be a relatively simple task.
So essentially wrapping what SCOM does with a nicer way of interfacing with that tool, essentially with SCOM. What does everyone else think about that point?
I think SCOM MI is going to continue to play a very similar role to what SCOM does today. And in fact, we have a number of customers who have previous to SCOM MI have moved their SCOM infrastructure into Azure with varying degrees of success. There are lots of sort of gotchas along the way that I would expect Microsoft to address those as SCOM MI matures and becomes ready for general availability. Agree with Cameron. Wouldn't that be awesome to have as you said, a chatbot to say, hey, I've got to monitor some Exchange services here and some SQL stuff over here. Make it happen. And I think some of the building blocks to allow that to happen are in place, but obviously you have to build a bunch of intelligence around that. And I still don't think it's going to provide you. Obviously we all hear a lot about observability today, and I don't think SCOM really isn't well suited. At least today it isn't. And perhaps there's extensions in the future that could get there, but isn't well suited to provide that sort of observability layer to allow you to see a transaction start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
So for the SCOM MI, I still have a bit of a doubt, because it's like really lift and shift, as we know, right? It's like not really like a reinvention. So, and what always makes a really good point of SCOM is the service and the health model. And I haven't seen really a chance to replace this with other things at this point. So, and unless that happens, we'll still have a SCOM, I would suppose. And we don't have the automated request, do me SQL managed instance monitoring, and it just magically appears, at least. So
I think that's a very valid point. Prior to my time at Squared Up and Kickdown and what have you, I worked at Citrix, and I was part of the team that rebuilt the on-prem 15, 20-year-old XenApp and XenDesktop product for cloud. And it was initially a lift and shift until we realized that was fundamentally not scalable, and it became a rewrite and a large piece of engineering work. So when it comes down to kind of that point, there's sort of two levers that could be pulled. Either Microsoft suck up that cost of the fact it's inefficient just to lift and shift something, and accept the technological limitations, or it's a rewrite, which is a large piece of engineering in my experience. So with all of that in mind, what does that leave Microsoft? What should they consider for their roadmap, for what they actually plan to do next?
Well, what I heard today from Akash was like, we're supposed to think about it Azure Monitor managed instance. Did I get this right, Bruce?
Azure Monitor SCOM
managed instance. Yeah, they actually changed this also on the manual I've seen. So, but for me, those things still don't go well together. So they tried this in the past. So can't really. So the roadmap is still unclear from my perspective, at least. So even if that's been the latest what we just heard.
I think the big opportunities in the whole monitoring space in general terms are analytics and ultimately AI, and to be able to look at vast amounts of data and be able to make sense of that data, to be able to drive things like predictive analysis with that data, to be able to eventually maybe move to more of an autonomic type of function where you get self-correcting systems. Obviously, that's pie in the sky today. But I think again, I think analytics and AI, I think, hold some really, really good promise for all of us that are involved in monitoring in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. We've got a good question / insight on the chat. There's a question about whether the Azure Insights could be seen as a first baby step towards these types of things. And I think in some ways they are. If you look at like VM Insights and Container Insights and things like that, they're giving you pre-built visualizations. They need to be aiming also towards pre-built alerting, but the concepts are really there. So that's a next evolutionary step. I would throw out, if it was my baby, I would revolutionize this. If you were to take the Sentinel approach that was taken and just mirror that for availability and performance and configuration, you wrap that with a little bit of AI on top of it, and you get yourself a solution that would basically revolutionize the entire monitoring industry right now.
It's really
to be fair, Sentinel is built on top of the same platform that Azure Monitor is. They're both built on log analytics, so I would think it's doable if they had they have the resources. I don't know if they could do it in theory, I would think, but yeah. Now it may be more complex. Security is a small, it's a lot easier to map out an attacker strategy versus, a lot more goes wrong in monitoring when you think about it, right? That's a much bigger problem to solve. But yeah.
So you've answered some of what I was going to ask there, which is sort of how similar are they in architecture? Obviously there's the how it's supplied, but technology, how close really is it to Azure Monitor? How close is it to being reality?
Well, Azure Monitor and Sentinel sit on the same back end. It's just log analytics, right? So from that aspect, it's all KQL. It's all, from an architecture standpoint, it's the same back end, right? So, but the SOAR capabilities is probably, from that aspect, you could automate in the same way, right? I'm sure they could take a lot of that code, just lift and shift it or reuse it, right? But the monitoring side of things, it's what you're looking for is completely different, right? You could probably use some of that behavioral concept. I don't know. That'd be kind of fun to think about. I'm not a developer. I don't know. It's fun to speculate, right? But you start applying your behavior analytics to user behavior and what they do to code programs and how it behaves. Like, this program always runs this way and now it's not, right? It's kind of a thought. I don't know. I'm speculating now. I really am. I don't know. I don't know how easy that would be or not, but kind of funny.
That's half the point there of a panel. Good panels to do a bit of speculation. So I'm totally fine with that. Any other views before I move on?
Oh, if everybody else is silent, I'll throw out one other quick one that I can't believe they haven't done yet. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Auto Manage. Anybody familiar with Auto Manage in Azure?
I've heard of it only, but not familiar.
Okay, so Auto Manage does things like setting up your backup and patching your systems and all these other things you need to do. You set up basically what is almost like a policy, but can be used in a policy to be able to define for test and dev systems, here's what your default configurations are going to be. Auto Monitor should have been totally included in that. Just simple, basic, standard monitoring that would cover the 90th percentile of what customers need for a dev test environment and for a production environment. Quick, easy win, but some reason they haven't done it yet.
That's really interesting. They had a stab with recovery. It's just the fact that with every MP you have to build those things. That makes sense. Where to go next then? So as far as if it were going to be SCOM as it currently stands, which it sounds like very much it's not going to be, it's not just a case, it sounds like, of adding additional monitoring, although that would certainly help. It's not a case of bringing SCOM's core capabilities to Azure Monitor, but that would also help. It sounds like it's a complete key change to what we've got today. That would be what you guys would desire the roadmap to look like. Is that fair? Very interesting. So that about brings us to time. Sadly, I could actually talk about this topic all night. So I'd like to thank you all for being a part of this panel. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Nathan, Christian, and Harold. It's been a great discussion as always. And I think it's a break now, so I'll hand back to Jason for that.